Hello everyone. Welcome to Modern History, the class of Modern History, the class 4. It is the fourth class on Modern History. And today we are going to discuss Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, and Indian Council Act 1909, which is also known as the Morley Minto reforms. So, the first act for the day that we are going to discuss in this class is Indian Council Act 1861. So you can see the year is 1861. So now 1857 Sepoy Mutiny is over. So there must be certain aftermaths of Sepoy Mutiny that has been laid down in the form of an act in 1861, like in the Indian Council Act 1861. So no, I think we do. We know the reasons of the Sepoy Mutiny, why the Sepoy Mutiny took place. So the revolt of 1857 had a number of causes. Okay, there were political causes. We know the doctrine of lapse that created a havoc at that time. Then there were economic causes, military discrimination, religious discrimination. The case about the introduction of Enfield rifle in place of Brown Bess, where the cartridge was said to be greased with animal fat, which provided the necessary spark for the outbreak of the revolt of 1857. Now the revolt of 1857 was over. Indians were suppressed. We know whatever was the outcome. No, right? The Indians who revolted, they were naturally they were suppressed, but there were also a lot of impacts which happened in the administration of the British Crown on the Indian possessions. So, though some of which are laid down in the Indian Council Act of 1861. So, this act sees the need of including Indians in the administration, because without the British Crown felt that without the cooperation of the Indians in the administration, they will not be able to rule over Indians. Like, in order to rule over the Indian territories, they need to have the cooperation of Indians. The people of India need to cooperate. So they have to involve Indians. So they need participation of Indian administration. Okay. So now there are a few provisions that were made under this Indian Council Act of 1861. So, a finance member was now added to the Executive Council of the Governor General. We know the office of the Governor General and that of the Viceroy of India was merged, and they were answerable to the Secretary of State. This was the new system, and in that Executive Council that was assisting the Governor General, another member was added who was supposed to look after the finance. Okay, now 6 to 12 additional members, like a team of additional members, they were added to to this Executive Council for legislative purpose. They were supposed to be nominated by the Viceroy for a period of 2 years. Now the Viceroy's Executive Council basically expanded. They had certain additional non-official seats along with officials. Okay, these non-official ranks were these non-official ranks were given to Indians, but they did not they did not hold a very high position. They were just included. They were these were made for Indians, but it was diplomatically made so that the crown supremacy prevailed. Okay, now in 1862, Lord Canning, he nominated 3 Indians in his council, and who were they? Maharaja of Patiala, Raja of Benares, and Sir Dinkar Rao. So, this is extremely important. What happened in the year 1862? Lord Canning, he nominated 3 Indians to his executive council, and to this council of his, he wanted 3 Indians to join, and who were they? Maharaja of Patiala, Raja of Benares, and Sir Dinkar Rao. The Executive Council also got its new name. What is that? What was it? The new name was the Central or Imperial Legislative Council. Okay. Now the governor general or the viceroy, they were given, he was this the governor general or the viceroy, the office was merged, we know. He was given certain additional powers. Now do you remember why the office of governor general and viceroy was merged? Do you remember? It was because of the conflict between the then Governor General Warren Hastings and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Calcutta or Fort William in the initial days of East India Company. And the Chief Justice then was Lord Impey. They were not in good terms. So in order to get rid of this internal conflict, the office of the Governor General and that of the Viceroy was merged. Now the Governor General had the power, the governor general or the viceroy, it is the same person, he is the same person holding office. He now has the power of making rules. He could make rules and regulations over the conduct of various business and day-to-daily activities of his executive council. He was ruling over the executive council. He could decide or nominate a president to the executive council in his absence. He could make someone the president of the executive council in his absence in certain meetings. Okay, in case he is not able to attend a meeting with the executive council and that meeting has to be held, in that case he has the right to nominate a president to this executive council to preside over that particular meeting, and the nominated person will have to take his position for that particular meeting. Okay, he could also promulgate ordinances. Okay, we will study what ordinances is in the days to come. Okay, now he could also withhold his assent or exercise his veto power whenever he felt that the bill affected the safety, peace and interest of the crown or British India. So whenever a bill was being passed, he could exercise his veto power whenever he felt that the supremacy of the British crown was being challenged. Okay, and he was to communicate everything that was going on in the country, all the laws, to the Secretary of State, who had the power to disallow them, like who had the power to negate the laws passed by the viceroy governor general with the with the permission of the crown. Okay, with discussion with the crown, having a discussion with the crown. Okay, also he could create new provinces for legislative purposes and he could appoint lieutenant governors for these for these new provinces. Okay, he could alter, modify and adjust the limits of these provinces. So he could make new areas and appoint lieutenant governors to these areas. Okay, so with all these things, the act also empowered the governor general to have a special task, to give special task to individual members, and all the members were to have their own portfolio. We have the cabinet ministers in today's India government. So basically this was the beginning of the portfolio system of India. So what was the portfolio system in India? It is much alike, or it laid the foundation for the first cabinet to be formed, the cabinet form of government of the government of India. What is the cabinet form of government? Every minister holds a particular department and he is responsible for that department. So he has his own portfolio, and and at that time most of the portfolios were kept with the governor general or the viceroy, but the ministers, like the executive council, the members of the executive council, to individual members and to the other members who were there, like in the executive council, the additional members and all those, they were also given certain portfolios. They were given to manage certain departments, certain tasks with respect to the Indian administration, with respect to British possessions in India, like administration of the government of India by the British crown. Okay, I hope this much is clear. Basically, history is interesting if you listen to it with interest as if you're listening to a story. But I don't know otherwise. I find it very difficult to learn without understanding. So I prefer you understand everything, revise, and make it easier for you to remember. These are the memory hacks basically. The memory hack is that you have to learn things. Uh, like you have to learn things later on, but first you have to understand everything. I'm sorry. So the governments of Bombay and Madras, they were now given the power of nominating their advocate general. We know that the governments of Bombay and Madras, they had gained a subordinate position. They had attained a subordinate position with respect to the Governor General of India. Right, because initially it was the presidencies of Bombay, Bengal, and Madras. Then the governor of Bengal gained supremacy over the presidencies of Bombay and Madras, and later on the Governor General of Bengal became the Governor General of India, and finally the Governor General of India, the office of the Governor General of India was merged with that of the Viceroy of India. So now this act gave some power to the governments of Bombay and Madras to nominate their advocate general. But these governments of Bombay and Madras had capacity of having additional members in the executive council for the purpose of legislation from four to 8, not less than 4, not more than 8 additional members in the executive council. Now, basically, this act restored the power, the legislative power that the Madras and Bombay presidencies had, and that was taken away by the Charter Act of 1833. The Charter Act of 1833 made it subordinate, but now, and that Charter Act of 1833 also took away its legislative powers, some of the legislative powers. So, this Act, Indian Council Act of 1861, the Indian Council Act of 1861, basically restores those legislative powers. Okay. The act also provided for the creation of legislative councils of Bengal, Northwestern Province, and Punjab. Also remember, the legislative councils of Bengal the council for Bengal was established in 1862. The legislative council for Northwestern Province was established in 1866, and that of Punjab was established in 1897. So the Legislative Council for Bengal, Northwestern Province, and Punjab, they were established in 1862, 1866, and 1897 respectively. I hope this much is clear. Now, measures concerning public debt, post office, telegraph, patents, copyrights, these were to be considered by the central government. Okay. I hope this much is clear. So, what is the importance of Indian Council Act of 1861? It added certain additional members to the Executive Council for legislative purpose. They were to be nominated by the Viceroy for a 2-year term. Certain Indians of high rank, but they were non-official seats, and also they were not given any statutory provision for the admission of Indians. This admission of Indians, they were also like Indians were being included in the Indian administration. Next point is in 1862, Lord Canning nominated 3 Indians to his council. Who were they? Maharaja of Patiala, Raja of Benares, and Sir Dinkar Rao. The Executive Council was now being called the Central or Imperial Legislative Council. The portfolio system of governance began in India. Like members of the Executive Council were given individual portfolios. The Governor General or the Viceroy of India was holding maximum number of portfolios. And this was the beginning of the cabinet form of government that is prevalent till today in India, that India still has. Next, the viceroy, the governor general, was given some powers. He could nominate a president to preside over the meetings of the executive council. In his absence, he had the power of making and amending rules that concerned the executive council. He could create provinces and appoint lieutenant governors to take care of the provinces. The legislative powers of the governments of Bombay and Madras were restored, which were taken away by the Charter Act of 1833. The legislative councils for Bengal, Northwestern Province and Punjab were established in 1862, 1866, 1897 respectively. Next up is the Indian Council Act of 1892. Now in the year 1885, the Indian National Congress was formed, and naturally the Indian National Congress voiced their concerns, like they wanted their demands to be fulfilled by the government. Some of the major, like a few of the demands were that the Indians wanted to be included in the Indian civil service. So they wanted a simultaneous examination to be held in England and India for the recruitment of Indian civil servants. They wanted a reform of the legislative council, because that is with respect to the way Indians were being elected to the legislative council. Also, there was an opposition with respect to the annexation of Upper Burma. Indians also wanted a reduction in military expenditure, which was done from the Indian revenues. Now, the Indians were amply dissatisfied by the system by which Indians were being elected to the council. Okay, Indians wanted the right to discuss budgetary matters. They wanted to discuss how the budget is to be handled. Like, Indians till now had no say in the budgetary matters. They were there in the council, but they were not given that power to voice their opinions. Like, they were diplomatically included, but it was kind of futile. They were not given much power, so they could not talk about the budgetary matters. So Indians wanted their right to discuss the budgetary matters. Now, Lord Dufferin, who was the viceroy during this time, he set up a committee to look into the matter. Okay, he wanted enlargement of provincial councils, enhancement of status, and he wanted to take care of the demands that the Indian National Congress had put up. Now, Indian National Congress naturally demanded for direct election. Now, the Secretary of State received the plan drawn by Lord Dufferin, but he did not agree to the introduction of direct election. So, indirect election was still prevalent with respect to the election and nomination of Indians to the Indian Council. Okay. Now, though the majority of the official members were detained, the Act added certain additional members of the Imperial Legislative Council at Calcutta, along with the Provisional Legislative Councils. Now, the total members were Oudh 15, Bengal 20, Northwest Province 15, Bombay 8, Madras 20. Imperial Legislative Council had minimum 10 and maximum 16 members. 2/5 of the total members of the council were non-official, and some of which were to be indirectly elected, and the others who were not indirectly elected were to be appointed or nominated by the viceroy. So, a new system, like a separate system, an element of election system, was introduced in India, but it was still the indirect system of elections. Okay, Indians were still to be elected indirectly, and some of the nominations which were which were to be direct, they were to be appointed and nominated by the viceroy. So, by this, the principle of representation was being introduced. Okay, now the power of the Legislative Council was increased, and their demand of adding members in the Legislative Council, adoption of principle and election, and their demand for that they demanded to discuss the budget was now fulfilled. Indians were allowed to discuss the budget, but then there is also another clause: they were not allowed to vote. So the entire system was very diplomatically arranged. They were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to ask any supplementary questions. They could ask questions on domestic matters, but that was also done with prior permission to the Governor General of India. They were allowed to ask questions on public interest, but they had to give a 6 days notice. And the Governor General in Council was empowered to make rules, regulations with subject to approval from the Secretary of State of India. Now, although the functions of the Provincial Legislative Council was enlarged, there were limitations with respect to the Indians' participation. They were allowed to discuss on budget, we see, but they were not allowed to question or vote. They had a lot of limitations. The reformed Imperial Council till 1909 met 13 days a year, with the attendance of non-official members being very poor, because these non-official Indians who were there in the council, they did not have any right to vote on the budgetary matters. They could not talk upon the amendments. They were not allowed to discuss amendments. Supplementary questions could not be asked. Answers could not be discussed. So there were a lot of disadvantages with respect to this act. Now, despite the number of disadvantages, this act was the beginning of the representative government in India. Although it was via indirect election, but still Indians were being included. There were limitations, but Indians were still slowly being included. Okay, this was at least an opportunity for Indian to share the council at the highest levels. Now, the few Indians who were included in the legislative councils, few Indian leaders were G.K. Gokhale, Ashutosh Mukherjee, Raj Bihari Ghosh, and S.N. Banerjee. These were some of the Indian leaders who found their way to the legislative council. Now, as there were a lot of limitations and Indians were looking forward to independence, there are bound to be more acts till we reach independence. So, the next act in concern is the Indian Council Act of 1909, or the Morley-Minto reforms. Now, who was Morley and who was Minto? Why Morley-Minto reforms? Lord Minto was the Viceroy of India at that time. Okay. And who was Morley? Can anybody answer this question? Who was the Secretary of State? What is the full name of Morley? Write your answers in the comment section below. I can help you. He was the Secretary of State for India. Now, what is the full name of Morley? Write your answer in the comment section below. Now, Lord Curzon, during the reign of Lord Curzon, he talked about the partition of Bengal. This agitated the extremists, like there was rise of extremism in the Congress during this time, and the government of India under the British Crown, on one hand they were trying to suppress the extremists, on the other hand they were trying to pacify the moderates. During this time, when such was the situation in India, Gopal Krishna Gokhale went to England, and he talked and he discussed, like he exchanged words with Morley, the Secretary of State for India. And now Viceroy Lord Minto was also emphasizing in the need for making some reforms. So both the Viceroy and the Secretary of State at this point decided to work on some of the points, and this resulted in the Indian Councils Act of 1909. The idea was to give Indians more power in the administration. Okay, now by that the size of the Legislative Council at both central and provincial level were further enlarged. The legislative members of the Imperial Legislative Council, we know the maximum number of members that could be added was 16, and the minimum being 10 was now been increased to 60. So now a maximum of 60 members were there in the Imperial Legislative Council. Now the Provincial Legislative Council was not uniform. The members of Assam, Burma, Punjab were to be 30 each. There were to be 50 each in UP, and the representatives of the members of Bengal, Bombay and Madras was also increased to 50. The members, both at the center of provinces, were divided into 4 categories: ex officio members, who were governor general, respective governor generals, members of the executive council. They were ex officio members. Nominated members, directly nominated by the governor general. Nominated non-official member, they were also directly nominated by the governor general, but they were not official government officials. And the fourth is elected members. They were elected by different categories of Indian people. Now, to the 4 categories, only one was to be filled up by Indian people, and the rest 3, that is the ex officio members, the governor general, respective members of the executive council, the second and third being nominated official members, nominated non-official members, and elected members. Elected members were to be elected by different categories of Indian people. Okay. Now, in the provincial councils also, the non-official members were included. Now, this enlarged the functions of the legislative council. The members were now permitted to discuss budgets, suggest amendments, which was not allowed in the previous act, and they were also allowed to vote with respect to separate items, with respect to certain items in the budget. They were not voting with respect to the budget as a whole. So there were non-votable items in the budget as well. It was not that the Indians could vote on all the items. They were entitled to ask supplementary questions, but during the legislative proceedings. But they were entitled to ask, but these were not bindings on the government. So you see, once again, there are limitations on which Indians could discuss matters and talk about. Like, they could suggest reforms, but there was no binding that such reforms were to be there was no bindings on the government that such reforms must be accepted. The next important thing is communal representation. Now, this act had certain discriminatory electorate also, which was on the basis of class and community. The provincial council had 3 categories: okay, general, special, and chamber of commerce. The imperial council had a 4th category, that is Muslims. The provincial council had 3 categories: general, special, and chamber of commerce, while the imperial council had 4 categories: general, special, chamber of commerce, and Muslims. Now, there were separate constituencies made for Muslims, and the Muslims had the right to elect their representatives. The income qualification for Muslim voters was also kept lower than Hindus. So Hindu and Muslim were divided. See, this is how divide and rule gets introduced in India. Now, the qualification of electorates were also defined. Electorates were being allowed on the basis of their income, property, education, which differed from community to community and region to region. This communal representation system that was introduced and enacted by the Indian Council Act of 1909, or the Morley Minto reforms, was discriminatory as well. They were separating Indians by religion and region also. Now, there was a provision of an appointment of an Indian to the Viceroy's Executive Council. This provision was made for the first time, that an Indian was to be appointed in the Viceroy's Executive Council, and Lord Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to be appointed in the Viceroy's Executive Council. The portfolio given to him was law. Now, this is extremely important. Who was the first Indian added to the Viceroy's Executive Council, and what portfolio was he given? So your answer will be Lord Satyendra Prasad Sinha was the first Indian to be appointed in the Viceroy's Executive Council, which was position made for the first time by the Indian Council Act of 1909, also known as the Morley Minto reforms, and he was allotted the law portfolio. Now, another important nomination was that there were two Indians to be nominated to the Council of the Secretary of State of India for the Indian Council. The Secretary of State for Indian Council, like to look after the Indian matters. Now, this act is extremely important for certain reasons. Now, it allowed the election of Indians to various legislative councils. Like we see Indian being allowed to appointed in the Viceroy's Executive Council, one Indian being appointed in the Viceroy's Executive Council, two Indians being nominated to the Council for Secretary of State for Indian Affairs. Now, this is extremely important. Previously, there were some Indians, but they did not have the uh, previously there were some Indians to the Legislative Council, but they did not have such high portfolios. Leaders like G.K. Gokhale and we have just read that leaders like G.K. Gokhale, Ashutosh Mukherjee, Raj Bihari Ghosh, S.N. Banerjee, who had already found their way in the Legislative Council, had utilized their power in fulfilling certain demands of the in the council, that is of universal primary education, respective policies of the government, and the situation of Indian workers in South Africa. Okay. Now, the next most important point is the groundwork of the parliamentary system in India was laid in this act. The electoral principle was introduced. The principle of representation, the communal representation, the electoral system. Now, this was basically the groundwork for the parliamentary system being done in India. So, gradually we see that the Indian parliamentary system is being introduced with cabinet, with executive councils members holding certain portfolios, so with which is prevalent which is much alike the cabinet ministers council today. So we see that the parliamentary system is being introduced. Now, the next important thing is it was a step towards the responsible association of elected Indians and the administration. Indians were growing closer to the administration. Indians were coming closer to the administration. They could now voice their opinions. They were in the council, and the legislatures were also enlarged, which basically made Indians one step forward in the demand of complete Indianization of the legislature. Like Indians now wanted to be responsible for their entire governance. Indians wanted to rule India. Now, this was just a step forward. Indians were entering the administration of the British Crown. So, this is all about the Indian Council Act 1861, 1892 and 1909. In the next class, we will talk about the next acts that were enacted under the Crown rule until India attained independence on the 15th day of August 1947, after which we are going to start India's journey towards independence in details. So, thank you for watching. Ask your doubts in the comment section below. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much.